The remark slid across my dining table the way a knife glides under a roast quiet, practiced final. Candles burned low in brass holders, throwing small halos on the oak. The windows held November's early dark, and the city lights blinked back like a distant audience. My brother's wife, Tiffany, lifted her wine glass and smirked the crystal, catching a warm ring of light. "Your parents only love you when you're paying," she said almost lazily, as if she were mentioning the weather. My mother laughed one sharp, bright sound that didn't belong to the home I'd prepared. "You're not welcome unless you clear your brother's credit card debt," she added, like a punchline everyone had rehearsed but me. The gravy boat trembled in my hand, and I set it down before it could betray me. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever felt like love came with a receipt stapled to it, tap that like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. To understand how that dinner cracked the story of my life wide open, you need to know how the seams were sewn. I grew up in a modest, tidy suburb just outside Boston where porch lights come on by habit and neighbors wave with their coffee mugs. My parents, Margaret and Charlie, made a point of reminding us how hard they worked for that house, with its 2 maples out front and the above-ground pool we swore was almost an in-ground. Our family values were simple on paper and complicated in practice. Be useful, be successful, don't embarrass us. I learned early that being useful often meant being available, and being successful meant never dropping what you carried. Ryan is 2 years younger and disarming from the first hello. He could spin a teacher's scolding into a hallway joke, and somehow the joke felt like a compliment to everyone involved. When he shattered the garage window with a baseball, Dad said, "That boy could sell ice to Eskimos," and I stood there doing the math on the cost of glass. When I came home with straight A's, the praise was brief, businesslike. "That's what we expect, sweetheart," a nod, a pat, and a new list of what came next. I learned to tuck my pride away like a receipt in a wallet, useful for accounting, not for celebration. By the time I reached MIT on a scholarship, I had perfected the art of carrying more than people saw. 2 part-time jobs, lab hours that bled into night, and the kind of careful budgeting where soup becomes strategy. The first time Dad called to say they were behind on Ryan's tuition, his voice was small enough to fit in my palm. "He's finally finding his way," he said. I emptied my emergency fund and told no one. The relief on the other end of the line felt like warmth I could stand near. So I did it again and again. Car repairs, a business shortfall, medical bills, insurance only half believed in. If there was a leak anywhere in the house of us, I was the person with my finger in the wall. I don't say that to be noble. I say it because habits once named stop feeling like fate. The condo I bought last year faced the city like a quiet lookout tower. 2 bedrooms wide, windows, old wood floors that answered softly underfoot. I invited my family to Thanksgiving for the first time, 3 full days off work, to roast an organic turkey brine and baste and tuck butter under the skin, the way a cooking class taught me at 2 in the morning. I ironed napkins, polished the knives, and spent an hour choosing a table runner that felt like late November russet gold, a hint of pine. This wasn't a performance. It was a welcome home to myself. I wanted my family to see it and see me. They came late. Tiffany walked in first with a coat that didn't need the weather, her eyes skimming my bookshelves like price tags. "Cozy," she said, and somehow the word bent as it left her mouth. She tapped her heel on the floor. "Is this real hardwood?" Ryan wandered toward the couch, open beer already in hand. Mom set her purse on the entry bench and talked about Tiffany's gluten intolerance, the revised menu, the friend who might drop by. Dad kissed my cheek and went straight to the kitchen, opening cabinets until he found the serving platters like a man looking for a tool he intended to use. Little things went sideways the way they do when people aren't careful with each other. The appetizer Mom promised didn't arrive. The decent wine they said they'd bring turned into something that came from the bottom shelf. Tiffany teased the cost of my cheese board, then smoothed it over with a sip and a compliment that fell short of kind. In the hallway, as I reached for extra napkins, I heard my name where it didn't belong. "She's so controlling," my mother murmured. "All this is to make us feel indebted." Tiffany agreed with an easy hum. "Ryan says she holds it over him." The napkins were crisp from the iron, and I pressed them against my ribs until the sting eased. Then I walked in, placed them by the plates, and pretended the air didn't chill as I passed. We sat. Candlelight softened the room and made good work of forgiving faces. The turkey was golden. The potatoes were whipped into silk. Dad squeezed my hand and said the spread looked beautiful. Mom remarked that the stuffing wasn't like the family recipe. Tiffany asked about my promotion with a tone that turned the word congratulations into a question about what I'd sacrificed to get it. Ryan glanced at her, then at his plate, then at me, as if each glance owed a different loyalty. I told them about leading a team and longer hours, leaving out the part about waking up at 3 a.m. to check on a server, like a worried parent. Dad beamed the way sunlight falls on an old porch, warm, consistent, grateful for the chance to land. Tiffany set down her fork and patted Ryan's hand as if she owned it. "Some people get recognized," she said. "Ryan's doing 60 hours, and no one notices." "It's not like that," he muttered, but the room already tipped. We moved through the courses the way families often do, with stories that skirt what needs saying, with jokes polished from overuse. I poured coffee and brought out the pumpkin cheesecake I'd made the night before, proud the crust hadn't cracked. Mom sighed about the shop quoting $2,000 for Ryan's transmission. "We're figuring it out," he said quickly. Tiffany rotated her glass by the stem and watched the candle flame warp through the curve. "Figuring it out means more credit card debt," she said. And then she looked up at me and smiled the wrong kind of smile. "Your parents only love you when you're paying." There are lines that land and then echo. You feel the blow, and then you feel what made someone think they could throw it. Mom laughed that bright wrong note. "You're not welcome unless you clear your brother's credit card debt," she said. The room went quiet in the way snow makes a street quiet, muffled, altered, dangerous to walk. I set my napkin down and stood. Not fast. I wanted my chair to slide back without screeching. I wanted my voice to come from where calm lives. "You're right," I said. Tiffany blinked, surprised to hear agreement where a protest should be. I let the sentences arrive in the order they needed. "You're right. For years I've been the family ATM. I paid Ryan's tuition the semester he would have been dropped. I covered Dad's business shortfall 3 years ago. I paid half of your wedding deposit, Tiffany. Last month I gave you $3,000 for the car. The month before that, rent. Before that, the security deposit. I keep spreadsheets. Not because I planned to wave them around, but because I needed the truth for myself." Mom's face drained without changing expression. Ryan's ears flushed red the way they used to when he got caught and still wanted to charm his way out. Dad stared at the candle, then at the table, then at me, as if adding up what he already knew. I felt steady. I felt sad. Those two things can sit side by side and not argue. "We appreciate," Mom began. "You expect," I said, not unkindly. "There's a difference. No one calls unless there's a bill with my name on the other end of it. You call me generous in public because it reads well. In private, it's simply assumed." I turned to Tiffany. "You married into this 10 months ago, and somehow you think you know the currency of this family. On that point, you're not wrong. My value here has been strictly financial." No one moved. With the right kind of quiet, you can hear a house learn something. The radiator clicked. A horn far down the street added a thin thread of sound, then let it hang. I watched my brother's mouth open, then close. He looked younger than 31, and older than his years. "Amelia," he started. "I didn't know you felt." "How could you?" I asked, gentle but direct. "When have you asked?" I let the question settle, not to shame him, but to stop saving him from the answer. I exhaled long and even. "I think it's time for everyone to go home," I said. "I need space to figure out what family means if it isn't this." Mom tried to laugh again, but it broke before it left her throat. "You can't be serious. You're overreacting. If it's only a joke," I said, "why did it land so true?" No one offered an answer. Dad stood slowly, already gathering plates because he needed something to hold. Tiffany clutched her purse and stayed behind Ryan's shoulder, smaller now that the show was over. My mother reached for her coat with jerky movements, as if the sleeves had learned to resist her. At the door, Ryan lingered. For a moment, we were children again, by the maples, his eyes wide after a broken rule. "I'm sorry," he said, voice roughened. "I didn't see it. I just didn't. I know," I said, and I did. That was part of the ache. "When have you ever shown up for me?" He didn't answer. Tiffany tugged his sleeve, muttering about drama. The hallway swallowed them. The elevator hummed its way down. The lock turned with an ordinary click that sounded like something else closing. The house exhaled. The table still held what we hadn't eaten. Fork marks dotted the plates, a constellation of small abandonments. Steam had left the gravy. The gold runner caught a smear of cranberry like a bright mistake. In the kitchen, the faucet's steady thread filled the sink, as if it had always been waiting for this. I washed plates with hands that didn't shake and stacked them to dry on the towel I'd warmed in the oven for guests. My phone buzzed and buzzed and buzzed, each vibration a small fist at the door in my pocket. I turned it face down on the counter and kept moving, not fast, not frantic, just faithful to the work of putting my own home back in order. When the last glass was set to air dry, I stood in the doorway between kitchen and dining room and looked at the chair where my mother sat, the one where Tiffany and her smirk had bent the light. The candles guttered and went out on their own. The room dimmed, gentle as a winter street when the porch lights blink off for the night. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor laughed a brief, bright sound that belonged to another story entirely. I wrapped my arms around myself and listened to the quiet. It had a shape I recognized, one I'd been moving around for years without naming. The apartment felt larger, without voices in it, larger and emptier and more honest. A draft curled along the floor and touched my ankles like a warning or a promise. I left the table set. I didn't blow out the last candle. It finished without me. In the bedroom, I pulled a wool throw from the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, with my coat still on, as if I might stand back up and undo what had already been done. The phone lit again on the kitchen counter and went dark. The city hummed its late November hum. The fridge clicked and settled. I realized I was waiting not for them to knock, not for an apology that would feel borrowed, but for something quieter and far more difficult. I was waiting to hear my own life without their noise. And I knew in a way that sat low and steady in my chest that the next sound I needed wouldn't come from my front door. I stood, reached for the bedroom lamp, and let the room go soft. In the darkened window, my face stared back tired and clear. The night had taken what it wanted. What I did next would decide what it left behind. The apartment stayed quiet long after they were gone. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that seemed willing to share the room with me. I moved through the silence carefully, like it might break if I made the wrong sound. The air still smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted turkey, but beneath it lingered something bitter, burnt wine maybe, or humiliation left to cool on fine china. I rinsed the last plate and watched the suds slide down the drain. My hands moved automatically, but my mind stayed frozen at the table, replaying that moment over and over until the words lost shape and turned to static. "You're not welcome unless you clear your brother's debt." The phrase had a rhythm, the kind people repeat because they've said it before in softer versions. I realized I'd been living inside those unspoken sentences for years. When the doorbell rang again around 9, my first thought was that they'd returned ready to smooth it all over. I almost didn't open it. But then came a gentle knock and a familiar voice. "It's me," Sophia said. I opened the door, and there she stood with a bottle of wine tucked under one arm and a small bakery box in the other. Her coat carried the crisp night air inside, and I could smell the rain that had started outside. "I figured you might need this," she said, setting everything on the counter. "Tiramisu, emergency portion." Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the abandoned plates, the untouched candles, the evidence of celebration turned ghostly. She didn't ask what had happened. Instead, she reached for 2 glasses and poured the wine. We sat at the kitchen island like we used to during our college years. Elbows touching the world, temporarily reduced to what could be held between 2 friends. The first sip hit like warmth and truth at once. I told her everything, the smirk, the laughter, the line about my parents' love being for sale, the way I'd stood calm and steady and spoken the truth I'd swallowed for more than a decade. Sophia listened in silence, her expression changing only slightly, as if she were holding her outrage carefully for my sake. When I finished, she set her glass down and said softly, "I've been telling you for years they use you. But even I didn't think they'd be that cruel. I wanted to defend them out of old reflex, but no words came. The tears arrived instead, sudden, unstoppable deep from a place that had never been allowed to ache out loud. I pressed my palms to my face, shoulders shaking. She reached across and held my hand without saying a thing. For a while, we just stayed like that, the clock ticking the city, murmuring beyond the window, and me finally letting go of years of composure that had never kept me safe. When I could breathe again, Sophia spoke quietly. "It's not about money, you know. It's about the kind of love they've taught you to earn instead of receive." Her words hung between us like a slow truth. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I knew what to do with it yet. She stayed until midnight, insisting I eat at least 1 spoonful of the dessert she'd brought. When she finally left, the apartment felt less like a battlefield and more like a blank page. I curled up on the couch with a blanket and let the city lights paint faint patterns across the ceiling. The next morning, my phone was heavy with missed calls and unread messages. I scrolled through them once before setting it face down again. My mother's voice messages swung between anger and guilt. "I can't believe you'd ruin Thanksgiving like this. You need to call your brother and apologize." Ryan had called twice, but left no messages. My father's single text simply read, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here." The words looked simple, but they carried a weight I didn't know how to lift. For the next few days, I kept moving through life as if I were borrowing it. I went to work, joined video meetings, and smiled at colleagues who congratulated me on my recent promotion. They saw the title change, the leadership badge, the upward motion. No one saw the empty space underneath the place where family used to fit. By Monday night, the exhaustion wasn't just physical. It sat behind my eyes in the hollow between my ribs. I remembered a colleague once mentioning her therapist and found the card she'd slipped me months ago. The next morning, I called and booked the first available session with Dr. Karen Levine. She was calm in the way people are when they've seen storms before. Her office smelled faintly of lavender and paper. I told her everything in order, beginning with that Thanksgiving dinner and unwinding backward through years of quiet rescues. She listened, not interrupting, her expression steady. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You describe a pattern of enabling. You've made it possible for your family to avoid consequences, and in return, they've learned that your worth is tied to solving their problems." The word Enabling landed like a stone. I'd thought I was being kind, responsible, even loving. But as she explained it, I saw the shape of the pattern clearly for the first time. Every yes I'd said was a small erasure of myself. Setting boundaries is not selfish, she told me before I left. It's a form of respect for you and for them. That evening, I sat at my dining table, the same one that had held so much tension just days before, and wrote out a list. Not of debts or payments this time, but of boundaries. Simple, practical ones. No more financial support. No more justifying success. No more pretending that love and obligation are the same. 2 weeks later, December arrived with the smell of pine and the sound of carols in every store. My mother called daily, sometimes leaving messages, sometimes just letting the phone ring long enough for me to see her name. When I didn't answer, she sent texts that swung between affection and accusation. Family comes first, she wrote one day. You can't let pride destroy that. A week before Christmas, Ryan called. His voice was tired but familiar, the same tone he used when asking for help in college. Amelia, I wouldn't ask if it weren't serious, he said. Our credit card's maxed out, bills are piling up, and the utilities might shut off before the holidays. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingertips to my temple. The old reflex stirred to fix it transfer money, make the problem vanish. But Dr. Levine's voice returned in memory, gentle and firm kindness without boundaries becomes harm. I'm sorry you're in that position, I said carefully. That sounds really stressful. So you'll help? He asked, relief already softening his voice. No, I said quietly. Not this time. Silence filled the line. Then came disbelief sharper than anger. Seriously, you're going to let us suffer because of something Tiffany said? That's petty, Amelia. This isn't about her, I replied. It's about a pattern that needs to end. I love you, Ryan, but I can't keep fixing what isn't mine to fix. His voice cracked into frustration. What are we supposed to do then? There are options, I said gently. Call the utility company. Ask about payment plans. Sell what you don't need. You'll figure it out. He hung up without another word. I sat for a long time staring at the dark window, the reflection of my own face, looking strangely calm. Guilt tried to surface, but beneath it was something steadier relief. The kind that comes when a wound finally begins to close. That Christmas, I didn't go home. Instead, I booked a small cabin in the White Mountains. The snow was deep that week, soft as flour, and each morning I woke to silence so complete it felt sacred. I hiked short trails, drank hot cider, and read until the fire dimmed. For the first time in years, I celebrated a holiday that wasn't built around someone else's needs. There were moments of loneliness, yes, but they were clean, not heavy. When I returned to the city after New Year's, I noticed small changes that felt larger than they looked. My apartment felt brighter, the air lighter. I joined a book club at a local library, started cooking for pleasure instead of preparation, and reconnected with people I'd lost touch with while I'd been busy saving everyone else. During one of our sessions in January, Dr. Levine smiled when I told her about the cabin. That's what I call filling your own cup, she said. You can't pour from an empty vessel. I nodded, the phrase settling somewhere deep. Maybe this was what balance looked like: quiet mornings, simple pleasures, and no one asking me to fix what they had broken. By February, I'd settled into a rhythm that didn't include constant worry. The phone still rang sometimes, but I no longer flinched when it did. I answered only when I wanted to. My mother's calls grew shorter, less demanding, though she never quite stopped reminding me that things haven't been the same. And she was right. They hadn't been, and they never would be again. One evening, as I left my office, snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. I stood under a street lamp and watched the light catch each one before it disappeared into the dark. Somewhere in the quiet between the traffic and the wind, I realized I was breathing easier. The ache was still there, but softer now, folded into the rhythm of something new. When I reached home, I placed my phone on the counter and let it buzz unanswered. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snow build gentle edges along the rooftops. The city glowed under it, and I thought about what Sophia had said, that maybe love shouldn't be earned at all. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt less like a loss and more like a beginning. By early March, the air had begun to change, softened at the edges, carrying the promise of thaw. The snow that had lingered for months melted into small silver streams along the sidewalks, and for the first time in years, I felt as if my own life was beginning to move in the same direction. I had stopped waiting for apologies that might never come, and instead started to build small rituals of my own. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market. Sunday evenings for cooking something slow and unhurried. Peace, I was learning, wasn't a grand event. It was a daily practice. Still, the distance wasn't easy. My mother's calls came less often, but when they did, they carried that familiar mixture of guilt and insistence. I'd grown used to the pattern: a soft opening, a story about church or the neighbors, and then the careful pivot. "Easter's coming up," she said one evening in late February, her voice lighter than it had been in months. "We're keeping it simple this year, just brunch, no fuss. It would mean a lot if you could come." I didn't answer right away. The thought of sitting at that same table where the laughter had cut through me felt too raw. "I'll think about it," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the boundary that had taken months to build. "Things haven't been the same without you," she said softly. For a moment, her voice cracked, and I could hear something unfamiliar: uncertainty. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. I thanked her for saying that, but told her honestly that I wasn't ready. She sighed, and we ended the call on polite, careful terms. It was a beginning, even if it didn't look like one. A week later, I suggested we meet for coffee instead. Neutral ground, somewhere neither of us could retreat behind old walls. We met at a cafe near the river, a place with wide windows and the steady sound of beans grinding behind the counter. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pinned too tightly, her eyes tired in a way that went beyond sleep. She started with pleasantries, asking about work, about the weather, about Sophia, and I answered, giving her the pieces she seemed ready to hold. After a few minutes, she stirred her coffee and spoke carefully, as though the words might crack if handled too quickly. "Ryan says you refused to help them last month. He's struggling, Amelia. The credit card companies are calling. They may have to move." I felt that old tug of guilt, but it didn't root the way it used to. "I know," I said quietly, "and that's why it needs to stay that way. They need to learn to live within their means." Her eyebrows knit together, the same expression she used when I was a child, and gave an answer she didn't expect. "But you have the money," she said. "Why wouldn't you help if you can?" "Because it isn't helping anymore," I said gently. "It's enabling, and it's keeping all of us stuck." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth carried its own weight. She didn't understand, not fully, but she listened. That was new. By the time we parted, she hugged me awkwardly quickly, but it was a start. As I watched her walk down the sidewalk, I realized that sometimes growth isn't a straight line. It's a circle you keep walking until you finally see a new door. A few days later, I ran into Tiffany. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the grocery store was half empty, the kind of slow day when the cashiers looked relieved to have someone to ring up. I turned the corner into the produce aisle, and there she was, Hair perfect, coat immaculate, studying the cucumbers like they'd done her wrong. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small, stiff nod. "Amelia," she said, her tone clipped. "Hello, Tiffany," I answered. "How are you?" Her laugh came out sharp. "Like you care. You've made it pretty clear how you feel about us." She dropped a cucumber into her cart with a little more force than necessary. "We had to cancel our vacation, you know. Ryan's been so stressed." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said evenly. "But I never cut you off. I just stopped funding your life." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're so much better than everyone else? Your fancy job, your perfect little condo. You have no idea what it's like for normal people." I took a slow breath. "Everything I have, I worked for," I said. "And I respect you and Ryan enough to believe you can do the same." For a moment, she looked ready to argue, but something in my calm seemed to disarm her. She turned as if to leave, then hesitated. "Ryan misses you," she said finally. "He'd never admit it, but he does." It was the first sincere thing I'd heard from her, and it landed quietly. "I miss him too," I said. She nodded once, then walked away, her cartwheels clicking against the tile. I watched her disappear down the next aisle, the echo fading like the end of a long argument. 3 days later, my phone rang again, Ryan this time. His voice was softer, uncertain. "Hey," he said. "Do you have time for coffee?" "Just us." We met at a small diner, halfway between our neighborhoods, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of bacon that never quite leaves your clothes. He looked different, tired, thinner, the lines at his eyes deeper than they should have been. When the waitress poured our coffee, we both thanked her at the same time, and for a second, it felt like the old rhythm of childhood, back before money turned into a measuring stick. "This is weird," he said, with a small laugh. "Right. Definitely weird," I said. But we both smiled, and the tension eased a little. He looked down at his cup. "I'm sorry, Amelia. About Thanksgiving. About how I've acted. About all of it." His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't hide it. "You were right. We leaned on you way too much." "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a lot." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the mug. "It's been rough since you stopped helping. We've had to make changes, cut back. But it's made me realize how much we were depending on you, and that's not fair. I can't remember the last time I called just to ask how you were." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. It wasn't the charm he used to smooth things over, it was real remorse, quiet and unpolished. I felt something in me loosen, not forgiveness exactly, but space for it to exist. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said. "I just couldn't keep carrying it all." He nodded slowly. "Tiffany and I are in deeper debt than you know. She has a shopping problem. We fight about it constantly." I met his eyes. "Have you thought about counseling? Not me writing a check, but someone to help you plan and get back on track." To my surprise, he didn't bristle. "Would you help me find someone? Not pay for it, just point me in the right direction." "I can do that," I said, and meant it. Over the next few weeks, I researched financial counselors and sent him a few names. One of my friends from work, Mark, worked in human resources and offered to pass along information about job openings that might suit Ryan's skills better. For the first time in years, our conversations weren't about handouts, they were about steps forward. By April, my parents had started to accept that my boundaries weren't a phase. My father invited me to lunch near my office one afternoon. When I arrived, he was already seated reading the menu through his reading glasses. He looked up and smiled the same easy smile I remembered from childhood. "Your mother's trying," he said as soon as I sat down. It's been hard for her, but she's learning. I know, I said. We all are. He folded the menu and looked at me carefully. I should have done more years ago. I saw what was happening, how they leaned on you, but I didn't want to rock the boat. That was wrong. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I felt tears sting my eyes. Thank you for saying that. He reached across the table and touched my hand. You're more than your paycheck, Amelia. You always have been. I'm sorry we lost sight of that. That moment stayed with me for days. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was honest, the kind of honesty that mends something, even as it admits what's been broken. When we finally gathered again as a family, it wasn't in anyone's home. Ryan suggested a quiet restaurant with big windows and soft lighting. Everyone arrived on time, dressed neatly cautious but willing. Tiffany was subdued polite in a way I hadn't seen before. My mother asked about my last business trip, but didn't mention money once. Ryan shared that he'd been promoted at the brewery. Nothing huge but a start. And I felt proud in a way that didn't require me to fix anything. There were still flickers of tension moments when old habits tried to resurface, but for the first time, they didn't win. When dinner ended, we lingered outside in the cool evening. My mother touched my arm lightly. This was nice, she said. Different, but nice. Yes, I said. It was. Driving home, the city lights blurred against the windshield. Each one reflected twice in the glass past and present, both visible for just a moment. The family I'd known was changing shape, not perfect, not certain, but finally honest. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to find out. Spring deepened slowly that year, like the world itself was relearning how to breathe. The days grew longer, the air softer, and with it came a quiet rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. My life had settled into something steady: work, weekend hikes, dinners that didn't end in arguments. I still met with Dr. Levine every other week, though our sessions had shifted from crisis to reflection. One afternoon, she looked at me over her glasses and asked, "You've spent so long focusing on others, Amelia. What do you want for yourself, just for you?" The question lingered with me long after I left her office. I walked home through the park, watching the trees blur with green, and realized I didn't have an answer. For most of my life, what I wanted was tied to someone else's need to be the reliable daughter, the helpful sister, the peacekeeper. Now, for the first time, I could start from silence. I began small. I signed up for a weekend photography workshop downtown, something I'd once dreamed of, but never made time for. Standing behind the camera felt strange at first, like learning a new language. But soon, I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked for years, the way morning light curved across the kitchen table, or how rain gathered on a window pane before letting go. Each photo felt like proof that beauty could still grow in places that had been emptied out. Through the class, I met new people: artists, retirees, young couples exploring hobbies together. Most of them were strangers I would only know for those few weeks, but one of them stayed. Ethan worked in landscape architecture, calm in that grounded way people are when they've spent their lives outdoors. We'd talk after class over coffee, trading stories about our families, both of us laughing at the unspoken understanding that neither story was simple. There was no rush to define anything, just a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. Outside my personal life, my relationships with my family began to take on a new shape. Ryan called once a week, sometimes twice, never to ask for money. Instead, he'd tell me small victories, how the financial counselor had helped him set up a plan, how he and Tiffany were managing to stick to a budget. One evening, he mentioned he'd been promoted again this time to assistant manager. "It's not much," he said, "but it feels earned." "It is," I told him. "You're doing the work." His pride sounded genuine, and I could hear the difference in his voice. The weight he'd carried before was lighter now, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. Tiffany was slower to change. We spoke occasionally, usually brief and polite. Once she sent a message saying she'd started doing freelance styling projects to help with expenses. It wasn't an apology, but it was something close to growth. I found I didn't need more than that. My parents were cautious, circling new territory as if afraid the ground might give way again. My father and I continued to have lunch about once a month. He asked about my hobbies, about photography, about whether I was seeing anyone. My mother was gentler too, though her efforts often showed in small, uncertain ways, remembering to ask how my work trip went, or sending a recipe she thought I'd like. She still stumbled into old habits now and then, but she tried, and I learned to notice that effort instead of what was missing. By the time summer arrived, I felt like my life had expanded in quiet, meaningful ways. I joined a hiking group that met once a month, rediscovered the calm of long drives with no destination, and began to fill my weekends with people who expected nothing from me except my company. Sophia joked that I was finally living like a human being, and I laughed because she was right. But peace, I learned, doesn't erase the past. It just makes room for it to rest. There were still days when I caught myself glancing at my phone, half expecting another crisis to fix. It didn't come. Instead, there were moments of stillness that used to feel foreign, but now felt earned. One afternoon, in late August, I received a call from my mother. Her tone was hesitant. "Would you have time for coffee this weekend? Just us? There's something I want to talk to you about." I agreed, curious but calm. We met at the same cafe where we'd spoken months earlier, sunlight drifting through the windows in pale ribbons. She seemed nervous, smoothing her napkin again and again before finally speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about last Thanksgiving," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "And about everything that came after." I said nothing, letting her find her own pace. "I didn't defend you," she continued. "When Tiffany said those awful things, I laughed. And then I made it worse." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I can't tell you how many times I've replayed that night in my head. You were right about all of it. We relied on you so much that we stopped seeing you." For a moment, all I could do was breathe. I hadn't expected an apology, not really. Hearing it felt both heavy and light, like the moment before rain. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It means more than you know." She nodded, eyes downcast. "We took you for granted," she said. "You were our steady one, the one who always fixed things. And when you stopped, we didn't know how to act." Her words broke something open in me, not pain this time, but release. It didn't erase the past, but it softened it. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, just once. We didn't need more words. When Thanksgiving came around again, I decided to accept their invitation. I told them I would bring a dessert, nothing else. My father's voice sounded relieved when I called. "It'll be good to have you home," he said. "No expectations, just family." That morning, I baked a pumpkin tart with a pecan crust, the kind my grandmother used to make. Driving to my parents' house, I noticed how familiar the street still felt, the same mailbox with the dented lid, the same maple tree leaning over the corner yard. The house looked smaller now, but not in a sad way, just human. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and apple cider filled the air. My mother greeted me at the door with an awkward smile and a hug that lasted a little longer than before. My father's face lit up the way it always did when things felt right again. Ryan and Tiffany arrived a few minutes later carrying a bottle of wine they'd chosen together. There was a quiet sincerity in the gesture that touched me more than I expected. We gathered around the table, and for the first time in years, the conversation didn't revolve around what I could fix. Ryan talked about his new position at work. Tiffany mentioned a small project she'd landed with a local boutique, and my father raised a toast. Nothing elaborate, just a few simple words about gratitude and second chances. Looking around the table, I saw the people I'd spent my life trying to hold together. They were still flawed, still learning, but finally willing to meet me where I was. My mother passed me the bowl of sweet potatoes, her hand trembling slightly as our fingers brushed. "I made them the way you like," she said. "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. The dinner wasn't perfect. There were pauses that stretched too long, moments when old habits flickered back like sparks from a dying fire. But the difference was clear. No one expected me to put them out anymore. We were learning to sit with discomfort instead of covering it with laughter. After dessert, my father turned to me and said, "We're proud of you, Amelia. Not for what you've done, but for who you've become." His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. I felt warmth rise through me. Not pride exactly, but peace. For so long, I had wanted to hear those words, though now I realized I'd already learned to live without them. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch while the others cleaned up inside. The air was cold and clear, the sky scattered with early winter stars. Behind me, I could hear the sound of dishes clinking, quiet laughter drifting through the doorway. For the first time, it didn't sting. I stood there for a long while, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching my breath fade into the dark. The porch light cast a soft circle around me, and I realized I was no longer standing at the edge of something lost, but at the beginning of something real. When I finally turned back toward the house, I carried the tart dish under my arm and the calm certainty of my own boundaries in my heart. Whatever came next, I knew it would be built on respect, not repayment, and that was enough. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was still. I woke before everyone else and stepped quietly onto the porch, wrapping my sweater close against the cool November air. The sky was washed in pale silver, and the horizon glowed faintly pink. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something in me had. I could still smell the faint trace of cinnamon and roasted turkey through the door, a leftover sweetness that drifted out every time the wind shifted. From inside came the slow murmur of my father moving about the kitchen, careful not to wake my mother. His hum was soft, the same tune he used to sing while fixing things in the garage when I was a kid. That sound used to make me ache. Now it simply made me grateful. I sat on the top step and looked out over the empty street. Frost covered the grass, and the maple tree at the edge of the yard shimmered under it, stripped of leaves but still standing. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt like belonging to myself. When my father opened the door, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands, I smiled and made room for him. We sat side by side in silence for a few minutes, steam rising between us. "Your mother wants to drive out to the lake later," he said finally. "She said it's been years since you went together." "I'd like that," I said. He nodded, his gaze still on the street. "You did a brave thing last year, standing up like that. I didn't see it then, but I do now." I let the words settle warm as the coffee in my palms. "It wasn't brave," I said quietly. "It was just necessary." He smiled faintly. "Most brave things are." By mid-morning, the house came alive with small noises, doors opening, plates clinking, the hum of conversation that didn't rise to argument. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was standing at the counter, arranging leftovers into neat glass containers. She looked up, meeting my eyes with a cautious smile. "There's fresh fruit if you're hungry," she said. "Thanks, Mom." I took a piece of cantaloupe and leaned against the counter beside her. We didn't say much at first. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just unfamiliar. After a few minutes, she cleared her throat. "I'm glad you came home," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I'm glad I did too." She nodded, blinking quickly as if to keep her balance. "I know it'll take time, but I'd like to make things right. I don't want us to go back to what we were. I just want us to start over." It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That was enough. I reached over and squeezed her hand once before letting go. Starting over sounds good. Later, Ryan and Tiffany joined us for the drive to the lake. The air was sharp with cold, but sunlight broke through the clouds in thin golden stripes. Ryan carried a thermos of cocoa and a box of old family photographs he'd found in the attic. We spread them across the picnic table, faded images of birthdays, camping trips, summer afternoons that had long since blurred into memory. Tiffany traced one photo with her fingertip, a picture of all of us by the water when we were still kids. "You used to braid my hair like that," she said, glancing at my mother. I remember my mother said, her voice catching slightly. "You never sat still." Everyone laughed quietly but easily. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, no sweeping forgiveness or tears. Just people remembering how to sit together again without expectation. Ryan handed me a photo of the two of us as children covered in flour from baking cookies. "You were always the serious one," he said with a grin. "And you were always the mess," I replied. His smile softened. "Thanks for not giving up on me." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine." He nodded, understanding in a way he hadn't before. It helped, more than I thought it would. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking the shoreline, the cold wind tugging at our scarves. The lake shimmered under a thin skin of ice, reflecting the soft blue of the sky. Every few steps, the crunch of frost underfoot reminded me that life doesn't return to what it was. It simply becomes something new. When the sun began to drop, I turned back toward the car. My family lingered by the water, their figures small against the wide horizon. For a long moment, I just watched them. My father steady, as always, my mother's hand looped through his arm, Ryan skipping a stone across the frozen edge, while Tiffany laughed behind him. The sound drifted up like something delicate, finally unbroken. That evening, after saying our goodbyes, I drove home with the window cracked open. The air smelled of wood smoke and cold pine. In the distance, the city lights shimmered like distant stars waiting for me. At my apartment, the rooms felt familiar, but lighter. The framed photo of the lake sat on my mantel, now taken during that first photography class. I set down my keys, poured a glass of water, and stood for a moment at the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Ethan had texted earlier, asking how the visit went. "Better than I expected," I replied. "Quieter, too." His answer came quickly. "That's what peace sounds like." He came over the next evening, carrying a small poinsettia wrapped in brown paper. "It's not exactly a Christmas tree," he said, setting it on the counter. "But it'll survive, even if you forget to water it." We cooked dinner together, the kind of easy rhythm that comes from trust, not obligation. Later, while we ate, I told him about the day at the lake, about my mother's apology, about how strange it felt to finally breathe without guilt. He listened the way he always did, attentive, quiet, present. When I finished, he smiled. "You didn't just set boundaries," he said. you taught them how to find their own. I thought about that for a moment, watching the candle flicker between us. Maybe he was right. Maybe standing up for myself had done more than protect me. It had given everyone a chance to grow. As winter deepened, life fell into a calm, simple rhythm. Work stayed steady. My weekends filled with hikes and photography trips and sometimes visits to my parents' house that ended in laughter rather than tension. Ryan still called weekly, though. Now it was to share progress instead of problems. He and Tiffany were saving for a modest home outside the city, and for once, they were doing it on their own. On Sunday mornings, I met Sophia for coffee at our favorite spot by the river. She'd listen as I told her about my family's slow transformation, her smile knowing but proud. "You found peace," she said one morning, watching sunlight scatter over the water. "And you didn't have to lose yourself to get it." "I think I finally understand what that means," I said. Spring came again, and with it, a sense of closure that didn't feel like an ending, more like the quiet stretch of road after a long climb. I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, inviting my family, Sophia and Ethan. My father brought a bottle of wine, my mother a tray of roasted vegetables. Ryan and Tiffany arrived hand in hand, carrying a homemade pie. The laughter that filled my living room was easy, unforced, real. At one point, as the evening dimmed, I caught myself standing by the window again, looking out over the city lights. The same view that once made me feel isolated now felt like possibility. Behind me, conversation hummed softly, the kind of background music I didn't have to fix or manage. Later, after everyone had gone, I blew out the last candle. The apartment glowed with the faint amber light from the street, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face, calm, steady, whole. I thought of that night a year ago when I'd stood alone in this same room, the air heavy with hurt. How strange that the same walls could now hold peace instead of pain. I opened the balcony door and stepped into the night air. The city stretched out beneath me, quiet but alive. The breeze carried the faint scent of rain, and somewhere below a car door closed soft and distant. I leaned on the railing and watched the lights blur and settle. Some wounds, I realized, don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. If this story found its way to you, I hope it reminded you that peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose one quiet boundary at a time. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. And if you've ever had to reclaim your peace, I'd love to hear how you did it. And if this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear that. Letting go can also be love. The night air was cool against my skin, the city humming softly beneath me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to see my worth. I already did, and it was enough.